Hey guys, today we have another exciting game of Revised 40. This time it's going to be myself on the left piloting my mono-red Fireballs deck on a mulligan to 5, unfortunately, against my opponent Stu playing his blue-black Unstable Mutation brew. So I lead with a Mountain and a Black Vice. I pass back to Stu, and since he has a full grip of 7 cards, he'll take 3 damage, going down to 17. Stu goes for a Swamp into a Soul Ring, getting some really fast mana early in the game. Back on my turn, I go for a Mountain and pass it back to Stu. He still has some cards in hand, so he'll take 2 damage off the Vice, going to 15. Stu goes with an Underground Sea as his land for the turn. And on Stu's turn, he goes for an Urg Raiders. Stu takes another damage off of the Black Vice. Plays another Underground Sea as his land for the turn. Taps for a blue, and goes for an Unstable Mutation to enchant the Urg Raiders. This would give it +3/+3. Not wanting to take this much damage, I go for a Lightning Bolt in response, killing the Urg Raiders and getting a 2-for-1 there. Stu passes the turn back to me. I untap, play a 4th land, and find a Soul Ring of my own. Stu is now under the Black Vice, so he's not taking any damage. So I tap 3 mana and play a Mana Flare. Mana Flare, a really interesting enchantment from Revised. It doubles the amount of mana that both players' lands produce. So now Stu's lands all tap for 2, and my mountains tap for 2. Stu taps a Swamp and goes for Demonic Tutor, so he gets to search out any card from his deck.
What's in the box? What's in the box?
Right now I'm worried about Stu getting something like a Brain Geyser or a Drain Life, because both of those being able to scale with the amount of mana that you have, I just gave Stu access to a ton of extra mana. So something like a Brain Geyser could draw him a significant amount of cards. But no, it looks like Stu just plays a land and passes it back to me. Untapping, I now have access to 12 mana, with the mountains being doubled from the Mana Flare. So we'll see if I have a giant Fireball to go for here. So I tap 1, 2, and play another Black Vice, floating a mana. And it looks like a Fireball for 10, using that extra floating. Stu does have the counter spell. That might have been the card that he tutored up with Demonic Tutor, fearing a gigantic Fireball. So Stu takes no damage, and the spell is countered. Stu now on his turn taps a Swamp for an Urg Raiders, since his lands are doubled by that Mana Flare, and passes the turn back to me. So at this point I'm looking for something like a Jayemdae Tome to draw me more cards, or a Fireball to try and deal lethal damage to Stu. But it doesn't look like I find anything. I pass it back. Stu goes for an Unstable Mutation again, and a second one, so this Urg Raiders will have +6/+6. It does get smaller every turn, but that is a lot of damage coming my way. So I take 8 damage going to 12, and Stu passes it back to me. Looks like I do not have the Fireball, so those Unstable Mutations shrink a little bit, and the turn gets passed back to Stu. He attacks for 6 this time, bringing me down to just 6 life. And he goes for another copy of Urg Raiders. So back on my turn, thinking about my options, I am facing down a lethal attack this turn, and I don't have enough to kill Stu with a Fireball. I'm 1 mana short. So I tap 8 mana and go for a Disintegrate for 7 on the enchanted Urg Raiders, just to keep myself alive. Unfortunately, still short by 1 mana. After he plays his land for the turn, Stu swings in for 2, putting me down to just 4 life, and passes the turn back to me. Still looking for either a Fireball or a Jayemdae Tome on the left side there. And it looks like I find one, so hopefully I can draw into some answers for Stu's creature threats. So I decide to activate this now in case I draw a sorcery speed removal spell like Fireball. I have access to 6 mana at this point, so I could easily kill an Urk Raiders. And I go for a Basalt Monolith, floating an additional mana, and using it to cast a Fireball for 3. Fireball takes care of the Urk Raiders if it resolves, but it looks like Stu does have a counterspell. Oh no, he has an Unsummon. Unsummon returns the Urk Raiders to his hand, so that he can replay it next turn, and he takes 1 damage from Mana Burn. Remember, Revised 40 does still play with that kind of outdated rule. So Stu recasts his Urk Raiders and passes the turn back. On my turn, I draw off the Jayemdae Tome, still looking for either a Lightning Bolt or another Fireball. I go for a Shatter on Stu's Soul Ring, since it's really the only thing I can do at this point, and pass the turn back. Stu gets in for 2, I fall to 2 life, and I have 2 more shots at something to try and win the game here. A Fireball is lethal at this point, but unfortunately not if I draw it off the Jayemdae Tome. So I take a Mana Burn from untapping the Basalt there, and go for a Lightning Bolt. That's targeting the Urk Raiders. Stu unsummons it again back to his hand, taking another Mana Burn since Mana Flare is making his islands tap for 2. Stu's still not quite in range of those Black Vices. He recasts the Urk Raiders and passes the turn back to me. I now have another shot at finding a lethal Fireball, assuming Stu doesn't have a counterspell. Doesn't look like I find one, so I have to draw off the Jayemdae Tome, and that's the game. So Stu takes down the first game with his incredibly fast aggro deck. Moving into game number 2, I'm going to be on the play again on the left side of things, and hopefully this time without a mulligan to 5. Looks like Stu does have to take a mulligan, and I lead with a mountain and pass. Stu goes for a swamp into a Soul Ring and passes back. I go with a mountain and pass, just looking for some more mana acceleration or something to get some large fireballs into play. Stu goes for an Urk Raiders and passes the turn back. And on my turn 3, I find a Basalt Monolith. Basalt Monolith really good at casting big fireballs, but you only really get to do it every other turn since you do have to pay 3 to untap it. Stu on his turn goes for a land and an unstable mutation, and swings for 5, putting me down to 15. Unstable Mutation is a really aggressive card since it comes out, gives a creature +3/+3, and slowly ticks away at the creature's toughness and shrinks it every turn, but it's sometimes better than a Giant Growth since it does repeat the effect. So on my turn I go for a Mana Flare, doubling both players' lands again. And I tap for 4 and go for a Disintegrate. Disintegrate brings Stu down to 16, and I pass the turn back. Stu plays a land for the turn and goes for a Brain Geyser, a really big Brain Geyser for him since all of his lands are doubled with that Mana Flare. So Stu gets to draw a ton of cards this turn, possibly looking for another Unstable Mutation to get in some extra damage, or maybe a counter spell to stop me from casting giant fireballs. But either way, Stu swings in for 4 and brings me down to 11.
If we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. 1 louder.
Why don't you...
Stu discards an Unsummon and passes the turn back to me. On my turn, I have access to 6 mana, so I go for a Fireball for 5, taking care of this Urk Raiders, hopefully. Stu does have enough mana to cast a counterspell with that single island because of the Mana Flare, so we'll see if he has it. And he doesn't have the counterspell, but he does have an Unsummon, letting him keep the Urk Raiders for next turn. He does take 1 off Mana Burn, but I pass the turn back to Stu. Stu goes for an Urk Raiders and follows it up with a second Urk Raider. We'll see if he has any unstable mutations. And Stu passes the turn back. Stu does have access to a lot of blue mana, which is a bit worrying when you're deck focuses around trying to resolve large spells. So I go for a Fireball. And it looks like Stu has the counterspell. So Fireball is countered, unfortunately. Still not able to untap that Basalt Monolith. And I pass the turn back to Stu. Stu goes for 2 mana for a Demonic Tutor. Demonic Tutor, a really scary card here. It can get almost anything.
You know what? Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, so I thank you. Identity theft is not a joke, Jim.
It could get something like a Mind Twist or a Drain Life to put him really high above me in life total, making it very hard to actually kill him with fireballs. But we'll see what he gets. Looks like 2 unstable mutations going on each Urg Raider. So the Urgs are going to swing for 5 each, bringing me down to just 1 life. In a really tricky spot here. I don't know that there's much I can draw to get out of this. It probably starts with a Wheel of Fortune. But it is still Stu's turn, so he goes for a 3rd Urg Raiders, just adding to the number of lethal attackers. After some intense counting of how much mana I have available to me, I go for a Lightning Bolt floating a red. That targets Stu, putting him down to 12. So I still have a red floating. Tap for 6 and go for a Fireball for 6 and use my last mountain, which doubles its mana, to fork it for exactly 12 damage, but Stu has the counterspell, unfortunately. So even though I did have the Fireball fork to deal exactly 12, Stu is able to sneak in a win with that copy of counterspell. Very likely what he got off of the Demonic Tutor. So excellent play by Stu here, not getting something like a Mind Twist, and just protecting his life total with that counterspell. So Stu goes for the attack, and takes this one 2-0. Checking out our most valuable cards for this matchup, in first place we definitely have Unstable Mutation, allowing Stu's deck to come out really aggressive really fast. And next we have Fork for almost making the kill in Game 3, and we have Unsummon for saving Urg Raiders from lightning bolts more times than I can remember. If you guys did enjoy this deck, the deck list is in the description box of this video, and be sure to check out the Revised 40 playlist for more gameplay like this. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.